Welcome to the History Garden channel. Today, we will explore one of the most fascinating periods in human history, ancient Egypt, with a focus on the ancient practice of mummification as a form of funerary ritual. We shall delve into its origins and examine the reasons why the ancient Egyptians carried out this intriguing rite. The ancient Egyptians had magical ideas about how life after death should be. It is easy to see why people throughout history find this mysterious society so captivating. They started this practice in 2600 BCE in the era of the Old Kingdom. For their kings and queens, the ancient Egyptians had interesting and complex funerary practices, but for the common person, it was much simpler. Mummification was a long and intricate process that could take up to 70 days to complete. It involved several stages, including the removal of the internal organs, the drying of the body with natron, and the wrapping of the body in layers of linen bandages. The internal organs were placed in canopic jars and buried alongside the mummified body. The ancient Egyptians believed that this process would ensure the preservation of the body for eternity and allow the soul to pass through to the afterlife. Mummification was not only reserved for humans, but also for animals, which were considered sacred in ancient Egyptian culture. In ancient Egypt, death and the afterlife were deeply intertwined with social and economic status. Those who could not afford the elaborate and lengthy process of mummification often opted for simpler burial practices. One option was to be buried in hot sand, which would naturally dry out and mummify the body. This process was seen as a way to achieve eternal life, even without the more expensive and time-consuming mummification process. Others, who had more resources, could pay to have the mummification process done for them, which also allowed them to be buried with special possessions such as amulets or pots holding food. These items were believed to help the deceased in the afterlife and were considered a symbol of status and wealth. The mummification process was a highly skilled and specialized task, typically carried out by embalmers who had received extensive training. These individuals were highly respected in ancient Egyptian society and were often given significant social status. Embalmers were responsible for removing the organs from the body and placing them in canopic jars. These jars were then buried alongside the mummified body, often accompanied by small figurines known as ushabti, which were believed to act as servants for the deceased in the afterlife. Mummification was not only a practical process, but it was also a deeply spiritual one. The ancient Egyptians believed that the preservation of the body was necessary for the soul to pass on to the afterlife. This process was seen as a way to achieve immortality, as the preserved body was believed to provide a home for the soul in the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that the soul would return to the body each night, so it was crucial that the body remained intact and preserved. The process of mummification was so important to the ancient Egyptians that it was considered a sacred art, and only a select few were trained to carry out the procedure. They believed that the heart was the most important organ in the body and that it was needed in the afterlife. So during the mummification process, the heart was not removed from the body. To ensure that the deceased's name would not be forgotten, they often inscribed it on the mummy's bandages. Mummification was not only reserved for humans but also for animals, such as cats, crocodiles, and even baboons. These animals were considered sacred and were often mummified as a symbol of religious devotion. Some mummies were buried with their pets,